Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leader Horse to Water, the Equine Training and Behaviour podcast. And as always, I'm Trudy Dempsey, and I'm your host today. And today I'm joined by Nicola Gregory, who holds a BSc in Neuroscience from the University of Sussex and a PhD, Dr Nicola Gregory, in psychology from the University of Exeter. Following her doctorate, she undertook a postdoctoral position at the University of Portsmouth, and since then she's been based at Bournemouth University, progressing from postdoctoral researcher to lecturer and now principal academic in psychology. Her research focuses on how humans understand others through non-verbal cues, particularly facial expressions. Throughout her academic career, she has used eye tracking technology to examine how attention is directed within social environments and how we interpret subtle visual information. She is now, excitingly, extending this work into equine research, exploring how horses perceive and respond to social cues. A massive welcome, Nicola. I've been trying to set this one up for a while and we finally get to chat. Obviously, I have a little bit of personal involvement recently in some of your study work. But first of all, say hi and tell us a little bit about you and horses before we get into you and your research and your clever hat.
Thank you, Trudy. Thanks very much for inviting me on. I'm really pleased we were able to do this. Me and horses. Oh, well, I guess like a lot of people, I started riding when I was a kid and just immediately fell in love with everything about it. I said everything, not everything. Most things about it. When I was about 8, and I suppose I loved being around the ponies, and I loved being outside in all weathers. And I lived in a town, so going out to the riding school, which was in the most beautiful part of Devon, like extraordinary Devon countryside, which you don't realise when you're a kid, but looking back now, I think, wow, so just being there, I just absolutely loved it. I think it also really helped with friends as well, because I was never very good at making friends, but there were other kids there that were obviously into ponies like me, and that I didn't know from school. So all in all, the whole thing, I just absolutely loved it, and I couldn't get enough of the whole thing. Very, very soon after I started having lessons and I was old enough, they used to do a scheme where you could stay and help for the day. Sort of looking back at it, sort of like child labour, isn't it? But anyway, everyone was doing it, I think, at the time. So, and if you worked, if you used to lead the younger kids on the ponies and run around the school and be there mucking out and grooming and all of that. So if you kind of did that so many times, you got a free ride. So, and I just, I would get a lift up there with one of the riding instructors that came through the town on the way to the place. So my poor long-suffering parents, who weren't in the slightest bit interested, but did occasionally, did take me out, but they were not going to be doing that at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. That just wasn't going to happen. So I used to get the lift with the riding instructor, be there all day. She'd drop me back at the end of the day. And it was just absolutely wonderful. And that was my childhood, really, going from about sort of 10, probably being there all day, to when I was about 14, and it became a bit sort of, I think there's a transition where you start getting interested in other things. I was interested in music and going out and hanging and boys and things like that. And I remember my parents sort of giving me the opportunity to either have the money for riding lessons or just have the money and I had the money for a bit, but I always missed it. I really, really missed it. And through my kind of teenage, through university, early 20s, I was still going and trying to find the occasional place to have a lesson, but it became harder to just have pony time because people don't want 20-year-olds just hanging around riding schools for no reason, grooming their ponies, even though basically. So I always felt the riding wasn't enough. That wasn't the bit that I was particularly into. It was everything else. And I was a vegetarian from quite a young age. I know you're a vegetarian as well, I still am. And so I always felt a little bit different to some of the other kids that were there. This is rural Devon in the sort of 80s and 90s. And coming at it from that point of view, I think you do look at the horse in a different way to some of the others, and look at the whole culture in a slightly different way. And some aspects of it I found very uncomfortable and felt very very conflicted, well, not conflicted, but just socially trying to fit in, but at the same time really hating parts of the culture. And so there were aspects of it that were quite difficult. I wasn't very aware of horse behavior or anything like that at the time at all, but I think I knew, what I thought animals were for, and it was definitely wasn't for eating. So I think at the same time, although horses were, as they still are by a lot of people, just treated as like a separate type of animal from a lot of other animals for some reason, even then I think I probably realised that these animals need treating with respect. And my mum used to say, because she was a vegetarian, she used to say quite openly, like, I don't think horses should be ridden. What do you mean? But so I do remember at the time feeling like that was quite a bizarre thing to say, and I didn't really understand that. And I think, I'm sure they wouldn't do it if they didn't want to. She was
That's such a conflict, isn't it? I mean, when your mother is saying that, I mean, I think my parents, my mum was terrified of them. My dad had been horsey for a long time, and I think it is quite a shock when somebody points that out to you. But you were young, so yeah, so interesting.
I was pleased that she did point it out. I didn't agree with her at the time, but I think it sowed a seed of sort of like, maybe I think maybe, oh, she doesn't understand about it. But it did sow a seed, and it took a long time to germinate the seed. Yeah, no, I think, I see where she is coming from with that. And I was glad that she was challenging it, really.
Yeah, for sure. So what did you do once you'd had that offer of the money or the riding or the money for riding? Is that where you parted company, and what happened then?
It was a bit tricky. I think I slightly outgrew the group that I was riding with, and I wanted to do something a bit more interesting. And I was sort of a teenager, and I wanted to maybe go do cross country or something, things like that. And so I did stop going to that place because I felt like I was just being, it was a kids sort of place, really. And then I found somewhere else. I did do a couple of sessions somewhere else, which was really good fun, that had a cross country course at Exeter, and that was amazing. But again, that I really, really enjoyed that. And then, but again, it was very reliant on them being taken somewhere. You do your 1 hour and then you leave again. And I always just came away just feeling like with this pang of sort of like, oh, it's not enough. It's not enough. Just this longing. There was no way I was ever going to be allowed to have a horse. It just wouldn't, living in a town, parents aren't interested, so it just was never going to happen. So we kind of parted company. But even when I was at university, I met somebody who had a friend who had a horse, and we went out once or twice. And so I was always sort of, anytime I met someone who knew about horses, I was and I'd gravitate towards them and see what I could get out of it. And I had a couple of little stints of trying to work in, locally, as a sort of a yard person when in my early 20s. Even had a lone horse for a period when I could drive, in my early 20s, but which didn't sort of work out just because of the match with the horse. And so I kept on trying. And after I did my degree, had a place to do a master's in. Well, we'll come on to the research and stuff, but I had a place to do a master's at Hartpury in equine science. I was going to go but then that didn't work out because I didn't get the funding. And so there kept being kind of attempts, despite my friends and family. It just is not what we do. This is not what we do. Horsey stuff is just not us. So but it just kept coming back. It wasn't until I was 40 and I was got my own money now, do what I like. I had, my husband at the time was very supportive, and his family were quite horsey as well, so it wasn't a weird idea. And he was confident with horses, so I had a bit of the impetus to get on and do it then. That's when I was 40, so that was 7 odd years ago, I got Callie.
Amazing. And it's so interesting that quite a few guests have had a similar situation where they've not been able to do it as younger people, but it's eventually been something they could do in their later life, which I think is amazing. It's a great way to do it. And that, of course, is how I met you. So bring us up to date with where you are now and the horse and pony that you have at home, and how things work out now?
Yeah, so we got Callie. So I got Callie, who's taught me, well, everything really. Then Callie, and then she was joined by a companion, Tots, who's a rescue, about a year later. And we were in livery. Well, me and Callie were in livery for about a year, which was interesting. And education, it's a crash course in that, really brought me up to date and just gave me so many opinions and thoughts. Yeah, that was amazing. That was an immersive experience of a year at a livery yard. But I couldn't really deal with being at a livery yard. It's just not me. All the social side of it, I'm not socially very interested in, or very good at being a social person. My husband, our ex-husband, we bought some land of our own, and we thought, because we had other animals as well, so we thought, right, we'll just put everything together, and we'll put all the other animals and the horses, and so that's what happened. And so everyone came together, which was really nice. But and that's when I met you, when we were in Somerset. But the downside of having your own land and not seeing anybody else, and this is all coincided with COVID as well, was that I did lose a lot of confidence and around riding, because of course I was learning to ride again as a 40-year-old. And it turns out when you ride when you're 40 and you fall off, it really hurts. And because I don't remember it hurting that much. I'm certain we used to just go, right, they go, right, get back on. You were sort of seeing stars and like mildly concussed, and it'd be like, right, off you go, let's try that again. As an adult, I had a couple of quite painful falls that required medical assessment. And I did, when I didn't have anyone else to ride out with, start losing a lot of confidence. Sally's was quite young. She was quite green still when I got her. I was totally naive about what I was doing. And I was just very, very lucky that she is a lovely, balanced girl. Thank God for that, because if she hadn't have been such a well brought up, if you like, girl, I think things could have been quite different. So now I have them. I rent some land where I live now in Devon, and I've got them there. And Tots and Callie, they're very different. They've got a lovely relationship which involves Tots doing what she's told, keeping out of Callie's way, and deferring to the Queen. And the Queen is basically like, and everything's fine. And they get on really well. They've got a lovely relationship, really. And I don't ride. I stopped riding. I probably had a year of, when I moved out of the yard, of trying to ride, and that's when you. But the problem with not the problem. The wonderful thing about Callie was she was not going to be compliant just to be polite, and just because this is not going to happen. And this was what happened when I started riding her when I was at the yard, was that she would be saying no quite a lot. She didn't want to stand at the mounting block. This is how I discovered positive reinforcement, because I was Googling it, trying to find out, why won't my horse stand at the mounting block? This was my first issue that I had. And this being my nature of sort of like, I want to solve this problem, let's look into it. And I wasn't going to, I had some bizarre sort of suggestions from people, as you do on the range of ideas or as you do on a yard, and being a kind of compliant sort of person myself up to a point, and deferring to them, because I had gone into that situation saying, look, I don't know anything about horses, right? I haven't done anything with horses since I was about 14. So of course I was ripe for kind of indoctrination. Yeah, but again, that's what I mean about teaching me stuff, because I don't just accept things. No. People were telling me to do this sort of thing, and I was going, what? That seems a bit harsh. I don't really want to do that. Or when riding, they say, no, you can really, really pull really hard with the left rein. I really don't want to do that. It just seems a bit unkind. And so over time, I was kind of, building up this idea of, Callie's trying to tell me something.
Yeah.
And I started listening to her, and I don't want to do something if she doesn't want to do it, because there's no enjoyment in that for me at all. If I force this poor animal to do X, Y, or Z, I might fall off, and that really hurts. I think that's where the pain thing and the fear came first, I think.
Yeah.
But you could feel the tension, like when I was being told, oh, make her do this, make her do that. You're the boss, you're dominant, you're in charge. She needs to respect you, all of this stuff. And I was just looking at her, just thinking, no, she's trying to tell me something. And the mounting block thing, she was trying to tell me something. And it turns out, of course, she was. She was
Yeah.
in pain. She was in pain. She had navicular issues and, hock arthritis, even at a young age. And she was trying to tell me stuff. And that's where, that's what she's taught me.
I think you are incredible, but then I think a lot of my clients past, now a friend and colleague, but they often started off as clients and feeling very sort of vulnerable because everyone's telling you that you're not good enough, you're not doing the right thing. And then sometimes vets just struggling to find anything very easily. And so the horse is sent back and then that person is thinking, that's right, you see, I am rubbish, I can't do this. And it is a vicious cycle. But you were already watching behaviour, you were already looking for the little signs. I remember being at your place and doing, sort of stand at the mounting block and stuff and just playing with what we might do when you did get on. And you being really quick to notice her little opt-in signs and stuff like that. And I'm always excited to work with human psychologists because they know a lot of this stuff already. And I think it's incredible you went down that line, knowing the person you are.
Thank you. I mean, I think, and yeah, the human thing, I think it would have come eventually, because I think what I know about human psychology and non-verbal behaviour eventually would have percolated through all the noise around horse training out to to be able to see what's going on. But what working with you did, and it was only a chance thing that somebody put me onto you, somebody in the village that had maybe had a session with you, and she said, oh, you like clicker training, don't you? Because I'd had a bit of a go on my own using an online kind of platform, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was quite interested and I liked it. And I met another person when I was at the yard who was also very good and knowledgeable, and it was her and you that just sort of opened this door of sort of like, there are other ways of working with horses. And I don't think I knew that. That's the thing. I don't think it existed. I think I had in my head probably the same idea that my mum still had of what horsey people are like.
Yeah.
And it opened this it just opened, well, it's more like floodgates really, of just like, no, there are other people like you that love horses too, and we can do this in a kind way. We don't have to force animals to do stuff. And they're trying to talk to you, they're trying to tell you stuff. So it was that combination of stuff. And then as soon as that all happened and I was allowed to kind of think in this new way with confidence because other people were doing it, and you had support, had you as a support, then I started really noticing all the cues. I started noticing the little things, the eyes, where she was looking, little bits of tension, she was looking away, that's when I really started noticing things.
Yeah, and we had a great conversation, I remember, around that time. And you were saying, I wish I could kind of get this into my work life. I wish I could somehow link what I'm learning with horses and people. And hey presto, because it seems like you've been determined throughout your life to sort of make this happen when you've needed to, you made it happen. So take us from that point and your ideas, and we'll have to delve a little bit into your history, academic history with the eye tracking and stuff, because it is fascinating.
Yeah, so I think it was something you said to me, Trudy. You said as well, so being academic, can you just research what you like then? And I sort of thought, kind of, yeah. And then you just sort of left, just left that hanging. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, right, okay. And so I started looking at the research, which I hadn't really done. I'd had a conversation with somebody and that I knew about, somebody else that was working sort of, it wasn't about horse behaviour at all, but it had something to do with horses, and it was another academic. That as well made me think about something, because I just sort of started thinking, there must be a whole academic literature on this. There must be a whole research literature about horse behaviour and how humans process horse behaviour. And I started looking into it, and I found lots of veterinary stuff and lots of behaviour stuff. And I got really excited, so I just geeked out and read lots of papers. But the more I thought about it, the more I realised, gosh, do you know, there's very little if not anything, about how humans perceive horses. So my research was about how humans socially sort of perceive visually, really. I mean, I'm mainly working in a visual modality, how humans process other humans at a visual level, and how they use visual cues to try and understand what's going on in the brains of their fellow humans, mainly looking at faces and how we process faces. And specifically, my PhD was about social cues, like eye gaze. And but it wasn't just mainly it was about eye gaze, but also did about pointing and how we, process that and what it does to our attention and our cognition. So that was where I was coming from. And I thought, oh, there must be research in how we process horses, because what we know from the human side of research is there's huge variability in how humans process other humans. So, we call it individual differences. So lots of different factors can affect. We all see things differently, basically, slightly differently. So some things will be seen pretty much the same for everyone. But when you come to things like personality, neurodivergence, gender, ethnicity, age, there's so many factors that influence how we see the world. We don't all see the world in the same way. And it sort of started to occur to me that, these factors might influence how we see horses as well. But particularly because I was interested in the welfare side of things, I was interested in horse affect, pain, emotion. And from working with Callie and Tot, who was a very, very nervous, fearful pony from her history, traumatized basically. So I was really interested in that side of it. So I started sort of thinking about, do we know anything about how we read horses? And it turned out we didn't know anything at all. I couldn't find anything about it. There was a couple of papers where people had talked about how they perceive emotions in horses, where trainers such as yourself, behaviourists, have talked about things. Then I found things about pain ethograms, which sort of were very much about, this is what pain looks like, now go away and look for it. And I thought, well, that's good, but are people going to be able to do that? I mean, given we know that things vary so much. And then I was finding stuff about, this is what seemed to come out more than anything, all these AI models, all these computer models that were training models to recognize pain. And initial training was being done by maybe one person. And I thought, blimey, one person? Given, in psychology studies, you want hundreds, you want as many as you can because of this variability. What if that one person had got it wrong? Yeah. What if they're having a bad day and they've trained the whole model on one person's opinion? And that's when I sort of really saw that there was a massive gap in what we know. That was it, really. From then, I was sort of
you had, so to speak, the bit between your teeth and you were off and running. I think it's really interesting because the ethogram bit is always hard, because certainly from Sue Dyson's ethogram, pain ethogram, those horses have just undergone surgery, most of them. And so the clinical signs are really obvious. And we're often looking for something so much more subtle, aren't we? So, yeah, I love that you found that gap, that there wasn't any research there, and then went for it.
It was, yeah, the thing that really struck me was the work is coming from, quite obviously and sensibly, from sort of veterinary science, from animal welfare, applied animal behaviour, and there was really no infiltration from psychology at all. And so it was I don't know, it just seemed that there was a massive missing piece of that puzzle that was going to limit how much we could really use some of this research. And I'm not proposing that I'm ever going to solve these problems, because I'm just hopefully starting to just make a little bit of headway in trying to say, but yeah, that's great, so you've done that, but let's have a look at how the human psychological factors change what we've got there.
So tell us a little bit about how that study functioned and the problems that we had in terms of, well, there weren't problems. You decided to go to it from the human aspect first, which I thought was a really clever way of doing it. So tell us how you set that study up.
Yeah, so we've had one paper published, and there's others in ongoing. So that first paper, the first study, was really just trying to get a broad opinion, a broad piece of evidence for how good are humans at seeing pain in horse faces. So we started with static images, so photographs, which I totally understand is not ideal and has lots of, there are other ways we can take that research forward and lots of factors that might influence that. But we've got to start somewhere, and this is what we do. We start at the baseline and then work our way up into more complex studies. So we started with images. The first problem was, where do you get the images from? That was our big problem, number one. So, and how do you know if the horse is in pain or not? I wanted to focus mainly on pain. Well, the problem we had was that we didn't know. So we used images from internet searches. We didn't know what the pain status was, but we used the ethograms to try and select a range of faces with different pain cues, so different levels. So there was the horse grimmer scale and the other one, equine pain face, and we tried to create a set of images, and this was working with my brilliant student Molly Trimmer, who at the time was so lucky that she came along. She's a psychology undergraduate at the time, and she loved horses. She had a horse, so it was perfect. So otherwise I would have struggled to do this without her, really. So this was part of her dissertation. So we found these images. We tried to find 10 that were low in pain, 10 that were medium, and 10 that were high based on the ethograms that we had. We ran them past a couple of, it was you and Rosa, the other collaborator, Rosa Vervice. We made some adjustments based on what you suggested, that some of them, images could be better or it wasn't clear. So then we changed a few out. So then we ended up with a really good range. We were only asking people to rate the images on a scale. That's it. How much pain do you see? We're not asking them to use the ethogram. They don't need to have any understanding. And so we asked a group of 10 equine behaviour professionals to rate the images. And because we didn't know whether the horses were in pain or not, so this was going to be our sort of baseline of the experts, what the experts say. We're going to take what the experts say, and then we're going to compare other people to what the experts say. So the experts happily were in very, very close agreement, like really, really close, which was brilliant. So we were very confident that this is the consensus. This animal's, getting a 3 out of 10. This one's getting a 5. This one's getting a 7. And then we use those images with 100 participants. Most of those participants were non-horse people. So we asked people whether they had any horse experience or not. If they said no, they went into one group. And if they said yes, then we asked them a few more questions. So we ended up with 70 people without horse experience and 30 with horse experience, plus the 10 behaviour professionals. And then, we just showed the images. They got to look at them it was an online study. They could look at the images for 5 seconds each, which is the standard viewing time in these sorts of studies. Any more than that, you start, making things up in your own head. So that's the standard viewing time. And then they get to rate the face on pain from, I think it was 1 to 9. And then arousal, which is, how revved up the animal is. So from very calm to very aroused. And valence, emotional valence, which is very negative. So, very angry or stressed, to very positive, which very alert, positive alertness, for example. So those are other kind of rating scales which are common in the psychology literature and sort of that behavioural sciences and things. So we also did the same with the human faces. So we took fortunately, there is a database of human faces for pain. So we didn't have to ask the experts because that had been normed on a really large sample of 900 people. So we were able to take that as the baseline. And that's what people did. So we asked them to do that. But we also, which was kind of the really important part, was ask people to complete a few questionnaires. So these are psychometric questionnaires that look at psychological traits. And we looked at social anxiety levels, which is because that's a field that I do research in already, and how that we were interested in how that influenced what people saw in the faces for the horses and the humans. We asked people to complete an empathy quotient, which I thought was going to be very related to how people see pain. I mean, it's supposed to be in the theories. All the theories say that it is very relevant to how you see pain in others. And we looked at length of horse experience in those horse experience people.
Yeah, so interesting. And I love that when you go into a study, you have this idea of what might come out of it. And you've already kind of hinted there that something you thought might come out of it with empathy was like, no, we're not seeing this. But we did see some other really interesting things come out of it. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. No, it was really interesting study, if I do say so myself, because what we found was that unsurprisingly, people are on the whole not great at seeing pain in horse faces. They were much better at seeing the pain in the human faces. I mean, we should expect that. We are humans. Those are our conspecifics. We have evolved with other humans. We need to know what other humans are feeling. If they're in pain, we have an evolutionary reason for needing to know that. Fine. But what we found with the horse pain accuracy, so this is how similar the people's responses were to the group of experts, remember, was that the longer length of experience that people had with horses in their life, and we were talking about being with horses, not just having a riding lesson, the longer experience they had, the better they were at seeing the pain. And it wasn't about age, because as you can imagine, the people with more experience might have been older, but that wasn't always the case. Actually, there were some very young, reasonably young people who'd had a lot of experience because they'd been around horses all their lives and they were still maybe only in their 20s. So it wasn't age that was driving it. We showed that statistically. It was the length of experience. So it was gratifying to see that, yes, the more you sort of hang around with horses, the better you get at picking up on the pain cues. And I know for some people that might seem obvious, but that's what a lot of science is. You have to, having common sense about something isn't really enough. You need to be able to prove it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we demonstrated that very clearly, which was great. So that opens obviously up loads more questions, but that was the main finding. The other findings were also quite interesting around people who are socially anxious. So I wondered whether people, because horses are used a lot in equine assisted therapies and interventions and educations, and a lot of people will say that they find them very calming and they resonate. This is sort of anecdotally or from more qualitative interview research. So I was thinking, well, it could be because people who are socially anxious are quite good at picking up on negative cues because they're on alert all the time. So I wondered whether that might translate to the horses. What we found was that actually the more socially anxious people were, the better they were at detecting pain in human faces, this is a very new finding, so no one's ever shown that before. But the more they said the horses were in pain, but they were wrong about it. So not only did we look at accuracy, we just looked at what numbers people were putting on the scale. And the numbers for the socially anxious people for horses were higher on that scale. They were more readily willing to say, that horse is in pain, that horse is in pain, that horse is in pain, even though they were wrong. So that's a bias. That's a kind of interpretation bias. And that is something I think you found really interesting as well, that we talked
massively. But it also goes into the point you made just a minute or two ago about people who had experience could identify pain, but they're not. We know they're not. We know they're not going to their vet and saying, my horse is in pain, because don't feel confident that they can do that. So for me, that was really interesting. People can see it, but they're not reporting it perhaps. But then, of course, the socially anxious people are over-reporting it to some degree, maybe internalizing it. They might not be rushing to their vet to say it, but they might be seeing things in their horse and beating themselves up a bit about it if they're the caregiver for that horse. And I do see that in clients. I found all of it fascinating. And I had no idea what would come out of it because I didn't have any thoughts. I just found it a really interesting project.
Was fascinating, and it was so great to work with. And I haven't mentioned Gabriel as well, so Gabriel Lencioni was also on the team as well, so it was so great to work with such a multidisciplinary group of people, with you and Rosa and Gabriel. So I was the only psychologist in it. And I brought my good friend and colleague Rachel Mosley into it as well. So but when we conceptualized the the project, it was really just us, so it was absolutely fascinating. And this is why it's so valuable that we work together in these groups of multidisciplinary groups, because to me, I'm thinking about designing experiments and what it means for the theory, although I am also thinking about my own animals as well, and thinking how it could relate to other people's animals and their care. But you're going out there and seeing people and talking to people and seeing the problems people are encountering and how things have led up to that point, and you're meeting a diverse range of people as clients, and then thinking about this is the reality, so we need to be able to keep these two things joined up all the time. This kind of reality, what it's like for the person, the anxious horse guardian, and I think I was one of them, who often sees things that aren't there and blames themselves, and then just doesn't do things because they're worried about the horse.
Yeah.
And I think this is what's happened to me over the years, is that I just sort of started worrying a bit too much about, almost it completely shifted onto, I just want her to be happy, I don't want her to do anything. So it went completely the other way. So she's fully retired and having a great time now, just mooching around. But you're seeing that a lot, and and Rosa, in her work, is seeing the students coming through. So it's so important that we're all together and having these conversations about the applications of this work.
Yeah. It is fascinating, and to me it's kind of like, even just talking to you now, I'm thinking, how could we take that information and work out why people aren't confident? They can see it, we've done a study, and it even sort of with 30 and 70, the 30 being the people who have that horse experience, we know that the more experienced you are, the more you're likely to see it, and they're just not. So I have no idea how one designs a study around that, but my brain is already back off on that.
I really need to make some notes here, so I'm going to get another study designed after this. Yeah, it's absolutely important that we work together like this, and why it's been so brilliant being able to take my experience and skills as a psychologist out and talk to the people who are working with horses, and listen to what the problems are. Because ultimately, I think this is how it's come round to for me with my work, is if I'm going to have a purpose in my work, it's to have a little contribution to improve equine welfare. But I need to know what the problems are on the ground, the everyday problems are, and that's how we can find those out, by being involved in equine events. And then I get to go to equine conferences for my work, which just doesn't seem right, really.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? But I want to just very quickly nip back. This is a very personal aside, but you said a little bit ago that might seem quite basic and that everyone knows that, but just because we think it doesn't mean that we don't do the science on it first. And I think that's really important, because where I was maybe 20 years ago, I used to read a study and think, well, no shit, what's it? I mean, it's sad, and I'm embarrassed now to say that that's what I would think. I would think, well, honestly, what are they telling us, horse people? But the reality is that is a jumping off for more science. You have to do that baseline, and we talk in baselines with horses all the time. What's their baseline level of stress, of anxiety around things? We're always looking for it, and yet somehow I expected science to be somewhere higher than that and would know all these things. And the reason is because when you look, there weren't any studies. If there had been studies, we could, in theory, I'm assuming, jumped off those to a different place. So it had to be done.
Exactly how it works. And because there's no, if you go back into like the 60s and 70s with experimental psychology, which is the kind of field that I've come out of, they were doing very, very basic stuff, but nobody had done it. You absolutely need to know what your baseline is before. But once you start introducing other variables into things, then all you have to do is add one more variable, two more variables, then you've got no idea what's going on. And you absolutely can't say, is it this? Was it the fact that the animals were moving? Was it the fact it had a rider on it? Was it the fact it was in another country? You know, you just don't, you have to start at the beginning. So you've got one thing with the faces of horses that are pictures with no tack on. Let's get it right down to the most basic level we can. And then from there, we can go, okay, what about video? Because I know these cues are dynamic.
Yeah.
And I know these are conversations we've had, and you say, oh yeah, but I'd like to know the context, because I crop the face, so you've got no background, it's all a white background, just the outline of the face, no tack. And I remember when we were doing the selecting the pictures, you were saying, oh, I'd like to know what's going on in the background. Is there another horse there? Where are they? You know, what's going on? Because it could just be a bit sleepy, but you know, of course all of those things have an impact, but has to come later, because if you start adding those in at this stage, we can't say anything. So no. we can't be sure of anything.
Strip it all down, so it's just a horse's face with just what that face might be telling you, and none of the horses have a background that gives you anything that would sway you. You are just looking, unless you have a colour bias towards grey ponies or something, you are literally going to look at them as a face and the things on that face. And yeah, I think that in itself is, yeah, that's how you do science. And I know I come from a science background. It's just when it's your love and you're seeing it day in, day out, you can get a bit frustrated with the length of time it takes for these, because it does, doesn't it? It takes a long time.
Such a long, I mean, if that was all my job was, it would be a bit quicker, but unfortunately, you know, my job involved being a lecturer primarily, and the research as part of the job. So there are kind of, you know, it's a proportion of my job. It's not all of it, sadly. So yes, it is slow, but this is a bit because this is such a wide open field. This is where we are starting a bit with this work. Is a bit like starting in the 70s with experimental psychology. Now, I don't want it to go. The thing is, this is an applied science that we're working with, so we need to go straight to the applied, really, with you know, more experimental and sort of theoretical psychology. You know, people can get very excited about theories and testing them and breaking them, and you know, I have to say I've never really got into that, and I've always struggled to see what is the point and if it's not got an application. And I think I've always wanted to do applied research of one kind or another. So this is another reason this is very satisfying for me, because I like applied science. I love it. I actually teach applied psychology now for students, and I really enjoy it. And I think you can see, like, oh, how do we get this from the lab out into the real world? And so I think we are going to fast track this research. I'm not going to be messing around with different coloured horse faces to see which ones are the most, you know. I think we need to get on and start getting some more practical outcomes that can be utilised by people.
Yeah, quickly. No, and I think I like you, I'm very applied, and I love the science, and it's what excites me to read about and think about how it applies. But we can get stuck in things like horse training and behaviour. Certainly we can get stuck in the theory without going into the field and working out what actually is going on. So yeah, I'm totally with you there. So tell us where we go from here. Where is Nicola headed? I know some little bits about where you're going next, but for our listeners, our viewers, could you tell us where you're going next? And I think you've got some quite exciting news on top of that as well that you can spill a tiny little bit about, but not too much yet.
Yeah, no, there's some really it's really exciting. So that first paper was published in Anthrozoos, the journal Anthrozoos, that came out in October. It's called Reading Pain in Horse and Human Faces. You can access that freely. That's an open access article that anyone can read. So from the back of that, some of the sort of limitations of that study gave ideas for the future studies. Now, we haven't really talked about eye tracking, but one of my expertise in terms of methodology with psychology is eye tracking. I can talk about that all day, but I won't. Eye tracking is cool because the eyes are moving almost most of the time under the level of conscious awareness. So you might think you know what you're looking at, but most of the time you don't. They're moving a lot, 3 times a second, and that's, you know, when you're reading, it's very tiring. This is why your eyes are really moving very, very fast. They're the fastest movement the human body can make. Eyes are really cool, and one of the things that makes them particularly cool is that very few neural connections between the optic nerve and the brain proper, like very, very few, like a few. What you're doing, and this is where I think the idea of the eyes being the window of the soul come from. Okay, so they can give you away quite a lot. Sometimes they tell other people things that you might not want them to know, but eye tracking is a very easy way of, in a non-invasive way, of seeing what the brain is interested in at any one time, second by second, or even, third of a second by third of a second. So the eye tracking devices come in all ranges and different levels and sort of qualities of data and accuracy and so on. But my sort of training and background, PhD, was based on screen-based eye trackers, where you can watch something on the computer and you can record where the person is looking while they're viewing the scene. So what that tells us is, what is the brain interested in at any one moment, or moment by moment. So one of the questions that came out of that paper was, what cues are people actually looking at when they look at the face? So in human face processing, people mainly look at the eyes, and then they go and look at the nose, and then they look at the mouth, and they do this sort of upside down triangle thing, which is very characteristic of people with typical face processing, and that is on a range, on a spectrum in itself. But we don't know how people look at horse faces, so perhaps people are not spending enough time looking at the important cues, and that's why they're not very good at seeing the pain. Perhaps the experienced people are looking at the important cues, as the ethograms would suggest, like the wrinkled eye, the tension in the muzzle, the strained jaw muscles, whatever it might be, the ears. We have no idea what people are looking at. Absolutely no idea. So the study that is ongoing at the moment, which I'm hoping to finish collecting data for this summer, is exactly that. So it's basically a rerun of that first study using an eye tracker, looking at horse people and non-horse people. Where are they looking when they're jumping?
Yeah, and that's way more complicated for you to collect that data, because you were collecting some Understand Horses Live last year, and you've got to have someone in front of the screen watching where their eyes are going with your equipment attached.
Can't be done online, sadly.
No.
Not with any. I think there are kind of, the technology's coming on for doing that, but the lack of control you've got over what people are doing at the same time, if they're eating their dinner or whatever, it's just not gonna, it's not gonna work. So fortunately, you can take the machine out to where horse people are. So fantastically, I took it to Understand Horses Live last year, and I'm also to do it this year. I think should also be happening, to just sort of get those horse people in front of a computer, come and look at some horse faces and press a couple of buttons, and you don't have to do anything. You just sit there and you look at them, and the machine does all the work. So it is a very cool thing. So we're hoping that will be completed this summer. So that's a big study. There's another paper that I'm writing, which is also look from the first study. So sort of follow up, which because we couldn't, and we had so much information, data from that, we couldn't put it all in one paper. And then I'm hopeful that there's going to be some really interesting work coming along, working with a charity as well, Equine charity, and that's very exciting. But that's not finalised yet. But again, it would be very applied, and it would be trying to sort of help use psychology, applied methods, including the eye tracking, to help with the training of their staff as well. So I think that would be very exciting. I'm there's so much, and there's so much. It's absolutely wide open. It's just finding the time to do it all, really.
You need to not have the other bit of your job to do and just be a research scientist. It's so hard, isn't it?
One thing I will say, though, is anyone is near in the Bournemouth area, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, and wants to take part in the research, if they want to do the eye tracking bit, it would involve coming to the university, Bournemouth University. There's a little bit of thank you reimbursement, but not very much, enough to buy you a sandwich and a coffee on the way home, but that'd probably be about it. And so get in touch. That would be wonderful. You can find me on my staff page at the Bournemouth University.
I will share all of your details. I'll share the link to the original paper, and I'll remind people that if they're in that area and they'd like, presumably in term time, to go in and do that we'd love it.
It's probably actually non-term time's probably
better.
Cool.
Okay.
That's when we've got more time to do this sort of stuff, when I'm not teaching. Okay. So that's one thing. And but there are going to be online studies as well. So if people are interested in taking part in this research, it would be great to hear from horse people, because it's just having those people that are willing to take part is the tricky bit. Finding non-horse people is easy. Finding the horse people is hard. It's harder in a university environment that doesn't do equine science as a degree.
Yeah, that bit's harder. But yeah, we know enough people, so please do get in touch with Nicola, guys, or me if you're stuck and you can't find out how to do it. I'll put you together with Nicola, so that's not a problem at all. I think at that last bit, the thing that excites me the most is the fact that our eyes don't know what they're doing, or we don't know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. The brain is very, very clever and filters out what we don't need to see, and that just blows my brain every time I think about that.
So when your eyes are stationary, that's when you're taking the information in. When they're moving, they don't take any information in. But you can change. This is the thing, you can modulate what you're perceiving. So lots of things influence what information we take in. Things like expertise, and this is why, coming to the experience thing of horses, this is why I'm expecting that there will be differences in the way people's eyes move when they've got experience, because they've shown this with other expertise, radiographers who are looking at x-rays. If you just got a random person off the street to look at an x-ray of somebody's lungs, what you'd see, the pattern of their eyes would be like this.
Like, what is this?
Random motion, I don't know what I'm looking at. But again, this sounds obvious, but you don't know until you've looked at this and studied it. If you look at experts, that they will be finely pinpointing the critical areas of the most rich information. And that's why people look at eyes the most, because the eyes are what are giving you, other people's eyes are giving you the most information about their mental state, their emotions. And so I'm expecting that the horse experience people will be focusing on the cues that we know are important for recognizing pain and effect, and probably the non-experienced people won't. Even if they do look at them, they won't be looking at them so much. So it's not a case of just, did they look at the eyes? Well, yeah, they will do, because there's only so many things you can look at when there's a picture of a horse face in front of you. It's more the fine-grained bits that analysis you can do, which is what you can only do when you do statistics on it, is looking at like little marginal differences between how long they look, how frequently they return to an area, that sort of thing.
I think that's so interesting to think about, because I know you said with humans we look eye to eye, nose, it's like this little triangle of looking, and that maybe people who are new to horses, that the eyes are doing the move about, don't know what this is, okay, and they start to get better at it. So then you'd expect maybe we would start to see some patterns come out of the more experienced people, that they would go to an eye, to an ear, to a muzzle, or whatever. So that I'm really excited to find out what that comes out of that.
We played back a few, didn't we? We played back I showed you a few, and it was, as one person, so it's, you can't draw any conclusions from that, but you could see that from an experienced person going, oh, they're looking at the eyes, they're looking at the ears, because I don't know, do you think a non-experienced person looks at a horse's ears? I don't know that they would have the first idea that was important, but of course we know it's very important.
It's I can only think of it like when I first looked at a parrot and I had no idea where to look, and then all of a sudden these two really beady little steely eyes, and I thought, that's telling me something. And then you learn to sort of spot the way the feathers are, but that's me experienced in seeing in at least one species, perhaps somewhat in dogs as well, seeing it, but not seeing it in, I have had no idea about birds at all. So we're all going to be sort of novice at some looking at some types of animals. So I think that's really interesting. So we have this to look forward to in a year's time, maybe? Are we looking?
How slow it is. It's so frustrating. No, I'm really hoping definitely next year for a conference to talk about this work. I'm partly maybe optimistically hoping that I might be presenting this at a conference at the end of this summer, but I'm not sure it's going to be there in time. Certainly, we've got humans. When I mean humans, I mean non-horse people. Non-horse people data. We have a little bit. So
Yeah.
again, we've got some students working on this project, and we've got a little bit of horse people data, but it's not enough to say anything yet.
Yeah.
So maybe next year, publish next year, maybe a conference early next year or late this year.
So get volunteering, people. Get on that eye tracker for Nicola. We need you. Oh, thank you, Nicola. Even though I know so much about this already, it's always really fascinating to talk to you and hear your very personal thoughts on it. So I wish you all the best with all that studying in the future, and with Callie and Tots, your personal equines as well. Thank you so much.
So much for having me, Trudy. It's been really good fun. It's gone really fast.
It always does. That's what everyone says.
My opinion, that's it. Can't be stopped.
It's amazing. Thank you very much for listening and watching, everybody. Thank you for listening or watching, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please share it far and wide. And don't forget, you can help Nicola with her data collecting for the eye tracking study by visiting Bournemouth University, or you could come join us at Understand Horses Live the last weekend in June at Rees Heath College up north. It's a great event. Not only is there a lot of learning going on, but it's great for networking and just feeling comfortable that you're around like-minded individuals. So if you think that floats your boat, do come along and join us. And if you're a listener to the podcast, come along and say hello to me. I will be manning the IAABC stand, and I would urge you to come and have a chat, because we have a new credential, the AET, the accredited equine trainer credential, which would be really interesting for you if you are already a trainer and you're looking for that third party credential, that stamp on your ability to say, yes, you've reached this level. Hope to see you somewhere later in the year. And if not at Understand Horses Live or on a course with me, then hopefully listening to the podcast next time. Take care.